before I get to the Warhammer drama, I want to talk about a few pop culture topics first. Movies, some upcoming movie events leading up to Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. And once again, let me say this first to begin. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is not a film, I've talked about it before, it's not a film I have any real interest in seeing in the theater. And I have seen the last 5 minutes of the movie already, and that's enough for me. So I'll get to that, and if you care about the movie, if you're really all excited about seeing Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, you may not like what I have to say. But before we get to that, I want to start off right here, Forbidden Planet. And I'm doing this for a reason. I'm talking about a couple of movies or other movies first, just to sort of set up what good movies look like. But Forbidden Planet came out in 1956, all right? 1956. It introduced Robbie the Robot, the first sort of extraterrestrial robotic being from which all others spawned. The robot on Lost in Space, all the way up to Data in Star Trek. And of course the movie had your standard 1950s babe in it. Look at that dress. I mean, look how short that thing is. This is footage, of course, from Forbidden Planet. And released by MGM in 1956, today this movie is considered a classic of science fiction and has influenced much of what came after. Gene Roddenberry was accused of stealing. By Gene Roddenberry's critics, he was accused of stealing much of what he put into Star Trek, the original series, from this movie. Others say that he was just inspired by some things, by some of the aspects of this movie. The guy in the middle of the screen there, of course, is Leslie Nielsen, who would later go on to have fame with the Naked Gun series and become a comedic actor. But this was in his dramatic actor phase when he was young in his career, right? But one particular moment is coming up right here that the critics sort of point to and say that this either inspired Star Trek or this is what gave Roddenberry the idea. Roddenberry denied all of that, of course. Roddenberry denied the fact that he took anything from this movie. But if you watch it, if you ever watch Forbidden Planet or you've ever seen it and you're familiar with Star Trek the original series, it's hard not to make the comparisons. And the scene that's in the lower left is where Robbie the Robot is first introduced in the movie. And of course, it's just a guy in a robot suit. But the voice work that they did was actually kind of extraordinary with the dialogue for the robot.
If you do not speak English, I am at your disposal with 187 other languages along with their various dialects and sub-tongues. Colloquial English will do fine, thank you.
Now, what these guys are doing on the main screen is they're not being transported. This was the inspiration for the Star Trek transporter scenes. And they're not being transported. What they're in is a stasis field. They're decelerating the ship. And in Forbidden Planet on the ship, they didn't have inertial stabilizers like the USS Enterprise. They all had to get into these little, stand on these little platforms, and they would be surrounded by a stasis field and therefore not be affected by the deceleration of the ship. And when they came out of the stasis field, they were all like groggy and everything, but the inertial mass, the inertial forces that were in play in decelerating a ship from light speed down to sublight speed had no real effect on them. The science in this movie reflected the time for which it was made, of course. Leslie Nielsen is talking into a mouthpiece that has a wire on it that runs to his suit. So they kind of got it half right. You can see the wire that his voice first need to go to a transmitter to be transmitted to the receiving station, wherever that might be. And of course, the wire it would prove on time to be completely unnecessary. These are some sort of phase cannons. You see them lighting up, and phase cannons would show up in both Star Trek and Star Wars. But the primary reason to watch this movie, and you have to take it in context of when it was made. Special effects had to be drawn by hand in those days, and almost like cartoon animation. And you'll see another example of that here in a moment. But special effects had to be drawn by hand for each frame of the film that they were going to be in. It was a very painstaking process back then. So this was state-of-the-art stuff for the time. But the real reason to watch this movie is the story. Now, it was the movie was based on a story originally written by Alan Aldous, who was a sort of a semi-famous science fiction writer of the day. And the basic storyline is, these Earth astronauts go to Altair 4. And on Altair 4, they meet a man and his daughter. And the captain, sort of Leslie Nielsen here, becomes enamored with his daughter. They're living in exile, right? This guy has moved to Altair 4 to live in exile. And the astronauts find him. Leslie Nielsen's character as the captain becomes enamored with his daughter. His daughter becomes enamored with him. No man doesn't like it, and he strikes out in a way that is kind of unique, again, for the story of its time. So the movie tells an age-old story about projection, about emotions, about jealousy, about spite, and about recriminations and the force that those feelings have upon an individual, all dressed up as a science fiction vehicle. Well, where would we see that again? Okay, that would become standard. That would become a staple of Star Trek, especially Star Trek, the original series, Star Trek: The Next Generation, and to lesser extents as time went on, Deep Space Nine and Voyager. Most of the Star Trek of today has given up on all that. Discovery and Strange New Worlds, Lower Decks, they've all given up on all that to promote social justice ideals. But back then, it was about the struggle of human nature. Okay, now I'm going to let this run just for another minute here, because this is the big monster. This is the monster that they fight in the movie Forbidden Planet. And look at the animation. Okay, that's Bugs Bunny Roadrunner stuff, right? It really is. It's Bugs Bunny Roadrunner stuff. You expect Wile E. Coyote to come running out and try to blow this thing up with an acne piece of dynamite, But again, it was, for the day, this was high tech, man, for the day when they made this movie. But the projection, what they're fighting is actually not an actual creature. They learn later that it's just a projection of the old man's anger, the guy who was trying to live in exile on the planet Altair 4 with his daughter. This is just a projection of his anger that's there to kill the captain. This guy gets fried, and but it's a good movie, and it's considered a classic of science fiction, and it inspired much of what came after. Both in the Star Trek and the Star Wars universe. Okay, I think now I'm gonna move on to Rollerball. There's the old guy. That's his. See, that's it. And when he wakes up, it goes away, right? Because he gets control of his anger. Okay, Rollerball. 20 years later, released in 1975 by United Artists. This movie today is still a phenomenal movie to watch. Directed by Norman Jewison and stars the late James Caan. And it presents a dystopian future where the corporations rule. This was a dystopian movie. But the thing as you watch this, one thing to remember about Rollerball is, again, this movie was made in a time prior to computer animation. They had to use all practical effects to make it, which means all these guys that you see here were a bunch of stuntmen from all around the world, mixed in with just a few actors like James Caan. And they had to learn to play the game, and that's what they did to prepare for this movie. All these guys went out. They suited up in their equipment. They built the rink. They built the track, right? They built the rink. They wrote down the rules of the game, and then they sent these guys out there and said, okay, they put them in uniform, and they said, go out there and play. Just go out there and play a game, and we'll film it. And we'll use, now there were some scenes of the course that were set up. They had to be set up, with dialogue and things like that. But once the game starts, that's how they film the match between, this is Houston in orange and Madrid in the green and white. And they just turned the stuntman loose and they said, go play. And that's what you're going to see here. This is the first part of the movie. So this was a phenomenal movie in that all these guys went out there and just did it without the benefit of movie tricks, as it were. When in most movies, when you see somebody get thrown or fall off a car or fall off a little wall or whatever, what you don't see is they land on all this big thick padding and everything, on their own wires. There was none of that in this movie. These guys just went out there and went at each other, and they played the game. And so to this day, it still ranks as one of the best movies ever made.
The officials have given their approval for play. Each team has included.
Now, the basic story of Rollerball is, again, a dystopian tale where in the future the corporations rule. There are no nation states anymore. The corporations rule. The corporations decide, which areas produce what product, how it's sold around the world. They control people's lives all the way down to what they will eat, what they will wear, how they're supposed to think, the whole bit. Of course, helped by the media, the mass media, it talked about here and there in the movie. The game Rollerball is meant as a bread and circuses type affair. It's meant to mollify the masses, right? Give the masses something to focus on. But the game is designed where no one is supposed to be able to overcome it. Rollerballers come and go. That's a line from the movie, right? Rollerballers come and go. And that's what it's meant subconsciously or on a base level to teach the people who are watching it, to impress upon the people who are watching it, is it's trying to win in this game ultimately is an exercise in futility. Trying to achieve is an exercise in futility because the physics of the track, the violence that's inherent in the game, bam, look at that. And they just did this stuff again, but anyway, causes a lot of injuries and death. And a lot of the players who go in, they don't last long. But it's meant to. The game is designed to ensure that happens, that the players, even though they're professional athletes, don't last long. So it's kind of like football and roller derby and WWE fighting all jammed into one. And the rules are set up so that, there's referees and there's some things they could do on the court that they would get, like in hockey, they would get a 3-minute penalty or something like that. But overt violence is kind of what's meant to be. Okay. Now in the upper left, you see now an insert from the Hunger Games. Grimla says, evening. Thanks, Grimla, for coming in. I appreciate it. Rollerball went on to inspire, and it's just the dystopian future that it presented went on, of course, to inspire a lot of future or further dystopian novels and movies that were produced after this came out, to clearly include the Hunger Games. And a lot of what's called young adult literature in the world today is, the nature of it, the very sort of forlorn, hopeless nature that's expressed in a lot of young adult novelizations and literature is based on this movie. That it's a bright, shining lie. The idea that you can go into an arena like either one of these. You can go into an arena like Rollerball, or you can go into an arena like the Hunger Games and win. But in the movie, that's the premise, that Jonathan E., the guy that James Caan is playing, Jonathan E. has been playing Rollerball for 10 years. And the executives have had enough. They said no one was ever supposed to be able to do that. He's now a threat. Because he survived in this game, because he overcame the odds, because he's been a success, he's given the people, Jonathan E. in this movie has given the people the one thing that we, the corporations, cannot let them have. He's given them hope. And that's the same thing that Katniss Everdeen did in the Hunger Games, is that by overcoming the Hunger Games and being successful on her terms, she gave the people hope. And that's why the government targeted her. And in this movie, that's why the corporations target Jonathan E., because he did the unthinkable. He did the unforgivable in giving the masses hope. So this movie is just, if you've never seen it, if you've never seen the whole movie Rollerball, I strongly suggest that you look it up. And I think right now it's playing. It's available through a number of sources. It's being played on YouTube. Actually, you can get it on YouTube if you buy their extended service or whatever. But there are a number of ways, of course, that you can see the movie. And if you've never seen it, I strongly advise. In other scenes, there are a lot of pontificating. There's a lot of cultural narrative that goes on. See, there's the referee giving a guy a 3-minute penalty. It's just the attention to detail here in this film was just phenomenal. So it's a great story. It's based on the short story, The Rollerball Murders. And if you've never read the story, The Rollerball Murders was told in the first person singular through the eyes of one of the players, Jonathan E., right? It's told through his eyes, and how he's beginning to notice that the corporations have noticed him and are starting to come after him. And it also sort of tells the tale of how, even in our sports of the day, like professional football, professional basketball, whatever, that if a very famous and lucrative athlete, meaning an athlete that makes a lot of money for a particular team, goes out and commits a crime, the leagues and the sponsors and all that have a tendency to look the other way, right? To a much lesser extent, this movie also sort of touches on that aspect of it. Okay, Forbidden Planet, watch this. Let me go back to Forbidden Planet for a moment. Nothing's coming. Well, I'm waiting for this to boot up. All right, look at this. There you go. This is, again, from 1956. This is the preview for Forbidden Planet. Now, where would you see this later? This sort of, the word crawl like this. Of course, you would see this in Star Wars. And was it 1977 when the first Star Wars came out? It had that very same crawl to it with the dialogue. And so that was clearly taken from Forbidden Planet, right? And let's go down here real quick. It had Walter Pidgeon as Dr. Morbius. And Frances was that's how she looked in the picture I had up a while ago. Leslie Nielsen. This is Leslie Nielsen in his Naked Gun days. And one other guy that you may be familiar with, well, Richard Anderson. Both Richard Anderson, Earl Holliman, and also James Drury. All three of these guys would go on to have extensive careers on television, in various television shows, and movies, actually, in movies. Earl Holliman had a role in The Bridges of Toko-Ri, which is another good movie. If you've never seen The Bridges of Toko-Ri, that's another movie that's certainly worth your time to watch. There's a couple of images here. Star Trek, the original series with the transporter effect. Here's Forbidden Planet, which came out 9 years earlier. This is Star Trek, the Menagerie with the background, what do they call these, matte paintings, right? Forbidden Planet, the same thing. Star Trek from the first episode ever filmed, the Menagerie. And again, look at the architecture here from Forbidden Planet. So there were some unmistakable parallels between the two, and inspirations from the two. This is Star Trek, if the original series. I'll turn the sound off here because this is from an episode entitled Requiem for Methuselah. And if you're a fan of Star Trek, the original series, and you've seen Forbidden Planet, then you know that this episode is almost scene for scene taken from Forbidden Planet. This old guy named Flint in the movie and his beautiful young daughter are living as recluses on a planet to get away from the rest of humanity. Kirk and Spock show up. Kirk becomes enamored with his daughter. His daughter becomes enamored with him. The old guy gets mad, tries to kill him. It's almost just line for line taken from the movie Forbidden Planet. So, Roddenberry should have just owned up and said, yeah, I copied it, whatever. But, okay. Rollerball had James Caan, Maud Adams, Moses Gunn was in this movie. Pamela Hensley, if you ever watch this movie, she was tight. And John Beck, this was the best movie he ever made, the best role he ever had. And, but again, Rollerball is just a good film. Let's see. All right, Secret Invasion. Let me go back to that now. Marvel Secret Invasion comes out June 21st. June 21st, right? This is... All right.
That
June 21st.
Here, Rhodey. And we can't even tell who the invaders are.
All right. Now, Secret Invasion, in case you may not know, is one of the, it's kind of like Guardians of the Galaxy 3 in that it's been filmed. You can tell by the previews that it's been produced, I should say, not filmed, but produced in the same vein, the same philosophy, the same sort of storytelling techniques that were used in Marvel's Phase 1, 2, and 3. And it's going to be, in my opinion, this is going to be one of the standout series for Disney Plus, one of the standout Marvel series for Disney Plus. It involves the Skrulls, who are shape changers. It involves Nick Fury having to fight one last battle, and in the sort of the last man standing motif, right? And it's a lot of intrigue, a lot of James Bourne type espionage stuff going on.
Fury, why haven't you called any of your special friends?
This war is one I have to fight.
Living on the edge to the end of our lives. Roof in the sheepskin telling me lies. Alone.
Okay, he says, he's asked the question, why don't you call in the Avengers? Where are the Avengers? Why don't you call in any of those guys? And he says, I have to fight this battle alone. Now, I'm not sure why, it doesn't really tell why, but it will dig into Fury's background. And I'm sure it'll have to set up, why he thinks he has to fight this battle alone.
This world is burning, and it was you who lit the match.
TikTok, Nick. This is personal.
Okay, now that was Emilia Clarke. Yeah, Emilia Clarke was of course, is in this series, and she played in Game of Thrones as Daenerys Targaryen. Colby Smulders is in it, who, of course, has been in the MCU for quite some time. And Samuel L. Jackson. And you will know my name is the Lord himself, of course, is the primary star. So I have a lot of high hopes for this. Let's continue.
You're the most wanted man on the planet.
Well, Mama always said I was special.
Marvel Studios' Secret Invasion.
I have a lot of high hopes for this, and it's actually Secret Wars and Loki Season 2 are the only reasons that I keep my Disney Plus subscription active, so I can watch these when they come out. Otherwise, I would have dumped it a long time ago, but I want to see Secret Invasion, and I want to watch Loki Season 2. And so I'm keeping it active just for that. Martin Freeman is in this. Martin Freeman, of course, played in Captain America, The Winter Soldier, and he was in both of the Black Panther movies as Everett K. Ross. Don Cheadle, who played War Machine, is in this for one episode. And my prediction, I'm going to make one prediction about this series. My prediction is that Don Cheadle, and the guy who is War Machine in the pantheon of Marvel, of the MCU, I think he gets killed. I think his character is killed off. In this series. That's one of my predictions about it. All right. Okay, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, and I'm not sure the release date is coming up soon. I'll go through the trailer first, and then I'll give my thoughts on it, and especially my insight into what I've seen about this film. Okay, so this is a short trailer. It's a short little teaser trailer. But listen to what Dr. Jones says here.
In 213 BC,
Archimedes built the dial.
All right, in 213 BC, Archimedes built the dial himself. Archimedes, who's often credited with inventing the clock or something, and for other wise sort of, he was a philosopher and all that, and 213 BC, Archimedes builds this thing, and here they have found it. Okay, now keep that in the back of your mind for a moment.
Course of history.
Sympathy for the Devil by the Rolling
We
Stones.
have our victory.
it's not yours. You stole it.
Then you stole it.
And then I stole it.
Okay. Remember that sequence. They're talking about the Dial of Destiny. The Nazis are talking about it. Indiana Jones says, you stole it. And then the Nazi says to him, and then you stole it. And then Phoebe Waller-Bridge says, and then I stole it, you know. Okay, keep that in the back of your mind.
Get back.
Yeah, that would really work. All those guys with guns, you just drop down beneath the table and, oh, where did he go? Oh, my God, where did he go? We can't see him anymore. Oh, my God, he got away. He got away just like that. He had a whip, and we had all these guns, and, jeez, it's, that is called writing. All right.
Gotta get there first.
I can't do that! You want to stop for a little lie down?
Turn left! Turn left! Indy, listen to me, no!
I know Tangier.
There are 3 clues in this movie, or in this trailer, I should say, as to why this movie is going to be horrible. This was one of them. Phoebe Waller-Bridge is in the background yelling at him, turn left, and he says, I know Tangiers. And what happens next? They go right down off a cliff or down the stairs or something. Okay, so this is, while I'm talking about this here, this is just footage from the prior Indiana Jones movies. So Indiana Jones is one of those characters that debuted in the early 80s, 83 I think, something like that, with Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is what this footage is from. And it became a franchise, a 3-movie trilogy. Harrison Ford was, and the character both were sort of well loved for these films. They became sort of icons of American history and our cinema history anyway. And it was a character that a lot of people sort of liked and identified with. Then they decided to bring it back some 18 years after the final movie, or even longer than that. It was, and with Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, they were dealing with aliens. Instead of looking for an archaeological object, he was looking for aliens that were after the Crystal Skull, and the Crystal Skull had magical powers. And it had his son in it. God, what was that guy's? Why can't I remember these guys' names? I get too many names juggling in my head, I suppose. It was just a bad movie. Crystal Skull was a bad movie. And it commercially, I think it made enough to be considered a success. But it was a bad movie, and everybody thought, okay, that's it. There's not going to be any more Indiana Jones because they screwed this up so bad. But no, now here we are, and Indiana Jones 5, The Dial of Destiny is out. And who's in charge? Disney's in charge. Kathleen Kennedy is in charge, overseeing the production. With the writer's strike, they had to finish up the script by committee. I talked about that on my last podcast, actually. And a script by committee is almost always, 95% of the time, spells doom for any script. A script by committee is just a bad idea, and it shows on the screen when that happens. This was George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, I should say, and Raiders of the Lost Ark was a fantastic movie, but it was singularly done primarily by one guy, and this one isn't. Number 5, done by committee. And here's the primary problem. Instead of being called Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, it should be called Indiana Jones and the Feminist Bitch. Now, before I go any farther, in order to understand what I'm going to say, you have to be able to, well, you have to be able to admit, I'll just plod forward here, you have to be able to admit that there's a difference between feminism and third wave feminism. There's a difference between feminism and angry feminism. And and if you can admit that there's a difference between those two things, then you can accept the fact that feminism is fine. I've never had a problem with feminism. Angry feminism, however, is a completely different thing. And angry feminism, third wave feminism, is what's showing up. This movie is taking the same track as Star Wars did, with the introduction of Rey, what's her name? Rey Palpatine or whatever. Rey Skywalker, but it's rumored that she's actually Rey Palpatine. But it takes the established characters, by which Harrison Ford also happened to play one in that franchise, kills them off, and replaces them with a young woman who's better in every way. A young British woman who's better in every way. That'll come up again in a moment. And why? Why does it always have to be that way? Why does Indiana Jones have to be replaced? In the common sense aspect of that, characters like Indiana Jones can't be replaced. They can only be supplanted. In other words, if you're going to continue the franchise with a new face, then you have to do it in a manner, if you want to retain your fan base, you have to do it in a manner that does not alienate that fan base. In other words, you're not going to take the replacement and shove it down everybody's throat and say, you will like this because we say so. That's what's going on here. Indiana Jones, let me go to the reviews. I'll turn the music back on here for a moment. This is Rotten Tomatoes, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Let me tile this up. Rotten Tomatoes. And on Rotten Tomatoes, it has currently a 56% rating in the critics. But yet to get that, they have to take reviews like this one and consider it a positive review. Okay, so because this means it's a positive review. All right, Ford is of course wonderful as Indy. All right, not a very glaring endorsement, because he's always been. He was Indiana Jones in the early 1980s, and he's always played the character. So the fact that he's good at playing the character shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. Getting some decent quips and grumpy lines. Grumpy, okay, who's grumpy? Well, old people are grumpy, I guess. Old men are grumpy. And of course, Harrison Ford is, 80 now or something? And his dynamic Waller-Bridge is amusingly adversarial. All right, let me ask you this question. If you're thinking about going to see a comedian, to pay your $60, $70, whatever it is, to get tickets, go in and watch a comedian, and you ask a couple people who have seen him, who have seen this comedian, you ask a couple of people. Okay, one of them says, well, the guy was amusing. You ask the next one. The next guy says, yeah, he was amusing. It was amusing. Is that really what you want to hear? Are you going to spend your money to go see that comedian? He was amusing. He's a comedian. He's supposed to be funny, right? That's okay. This is like the critic is saying, and his dynamic with Waller-Bridge is amusingly adversarial. They kind of play off each other. This is what they're counting as a positive review. Another one. It's adventure, though, that everyone really wants from an Indiana Jones movie. That front end delivers. It delivers. Add to that the rousing familiarity with John Williams' score, and it all amounts to a comforting, if not especially challenging, reboot. That is not exactly a ringing endorsement either. Okay? If you have to fall back on the music score to get people to go see a movie, then the movie sucks. Nobody goes to see a movie to hear the music. Music is one of those things that when the movie's over, you think to yourself, the music was really good too, right? The music was really well done. But you don't go to see the movie for the background music. It's something that makes an impression on you in addition to whatever else is going on. So when a critic has to resort to the music score to try to convince you to go, the movie's in trouble.
John Williams! Great. Now we gotta do the rest of this thing with Danny Elfman.
Let's see. One of the less than stellar criticisms, I suppose, or one of the rotten criticisms. An adventure that, by stripping itself of all fan service air, feels simulated and forced. Well, isn't that's kind of the whole point? That's why a lot of people have been criticizing this movie ever since they first announced that it was going to be made. I should say why are you doing this? And that's a good question. Fun isn't the most accurate way to describe its excessive antics. There's never a dull moment, but all the globe-trotting hullabaloo does verge on exhausting. This is a critic desperately, in my opinion, trying to say something about the movie that's critical without being critical. And that's a fine line to walk, trying to be critical without being critical. And all pretty goofy and laborious. Okay, let's try one more positive one, then I'll move on. It often fizzes as much as it lulls. What exactly does that mean? It often fizzes as much as it lulls. When you say something fizzes, what are you sort of talking about? Something that sparkles for a moment and then is gone. That's what fizzes means. Something that sparkles or effervesces for a moment and then quickly subsides. That's almost a textbook definition of the slang term fizzes. And then what does lull mean? Okay, lull can mean a downturn. It can also mean a period of laughter. But in this case, I would think it means a downturn. But in Mickelson's Dr. Smith, the film can at least boast a worthy antagonist, and one with enough personality to cover some of those cracks. Okay, well, the antagonist, of course, is whoever Jones is fighting. Who's he fighting? The Nazis. All right, now let me move on to my main point here about this. How can you go wrong fighting the Nazis, I guess, is my point. But anyway, let me go on. What happens in this movie? All right, a few days back, on a website I sometimes frequent, whose name shall remain nameless here, because if I were to show what I found there, I could get in trouble. I could get banned from Twitch. Now, I'm not trying to make a big deal about this. There are a lot of guys out there who have access to this. There are a lot of people. I just can't show it here. But a few days back, somebody actually put up the last 5 minutes of this movie. Wasn't up for long, and I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. And what the last 5 movies show is that Disney was clever in changing the film. Originally, the film was supposed to take Fleabag here. There's a better picture. Was supposed to take Fleabag here and Indiana Jones, and I call her Fleabag because she made a movie titled Fleabag. That was her character. And back in time, with the Dial of Destiny, old Indiana Jones would meet young Indiana Jones. At some point in the movie, old Indiana Jones would try to save her life, causing young Indiana Jones to die, thus erasing Indiana Jones completely from history. She would then pick up the fedora and walk off into the sunset to become the new Indiana Jones. All right. They reshot all that. This movie has cost upward of $300 million because of all the reshoots. They reshot it. Now what happens at the end of the movie is not only do they fight the Nazis, they go all the way back to like 213 BC. They meet Archimedes himself. And Archimedes has originally made the Dial of Destiny specifically set exactly for that, so that his life could be saved in the siege of Babylon, or whatever it is. I mean, he's in a battle, and so he set the dial to bring those who would find it at some point in the future back to him so that they could save his life. They do. Indiana Jones decides he wants to stay back in 213 BC because he doesn't want to live in 1969. Phoebe Waller-Bridge says, okay, I can't let you do that because you might change the timeline, because this is a different timeline than the Marvel timeline. So she punches him out. When he wakes up, they're back in 1969 in his apartment, and his old girlfriend walks in with a big bag of groceries, and the film fades to black with somebody, not really knowing exactly who, but somebody grabbing the hat. Okay? As if they're going to set off on another adventure. Well, who would that be? So, in essence, they've done the same thing. Instead of just killing Indiana Jones off and erasing him completely from history, they just did it in a different manner. Now, why does that bother me? You may be saying, why does that bother me? Because it's poor storytelling. I'll make a comparison. Lara Croft. Last I heard, Lara Croft was a woman. Now, if I'm wrong about that, you guys feel free to chime in. But last I heard, Lara Croft was a woman. And I've always been a fan of Lara Croft. I've played those games, ever since the first PS1 came out. I went to see the Angelina Jolie movies, and I thought Angelina Jolie was just fracking gorgeous as Lara Croft. The movies themselves, they were okay, but she made a very convincing Lara Croft. I went and saw the new one that was made a few years back, and I actually liked it. I actually liked the movie. I thought the actress they had in that movie was very good. And let's see here. This is just generic footage from the most recent Lara Croft movie. Now, this one kind of got panned by the critics too. A lot of people didn't like it for various reasons. I did. It wasn't a great movie, but it was entertaining. I found it, and I thought she was. I can't remember this actress's name at the moment, who's playing young Lara Croft, but I thought she was perfectly fine. And when she came into the part of the movie where she put on the outfit, right? Put on the outfit and started running around like Lara Croft does in the more recent games, like Rise of the Tomb Raider. I thought it was just very well done. She was convincing. She was believable, right? She looked the part, okay? Fleabag in Indiana Jones doesn't. The whole thing is contrived. The whole issue with Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is to erase him from the franchise and replace him for a woman, just because. That's the difference. Okay, we're going to replace Indiana Jones the same way we replaced Luke Skywalker. Luke Skywalker, was killed off so that Rey Skywalker Palpatine could take his place. Now we're doing the same thing with Indiana Jones, just because. Okay, just because. Lara Croft was never a figure that ever applied to. She was who she was from the very beginning, and she was very believable. She was an adolescent's dream. I'll put it that way. She was a young male adolescent's dream, and always has been. So Indiana Jones, though, is contrived to achieve one particular goal. And you can see it here. On top of Ford's admitting his character now lacks courage, bravery, and strength, Lucasfilm also been captured by feminist ideology that derides male characters. That's what I've been saying all this time. Lucasfilm President Kathleen Kennedy admitted to embracing this ideology throughout the entire company. She said during Fortune magazine's Most Powerful Woman Summit, the fact that the company has bought by the Walt Disney Company has been amazing because they very much support the fact that we are trying to grow in the workforce a number of women in executive positions and all positions inside the company. All right. Now, on that particular aspect of it, grow the company to include more women in executive positions. Okay, fine. I don't care. Fine. If they're qualified to do the job, more power to them. I have no issue with this part. However, and with the movies we are making and with the protagonists we are putting in the stories, so I get a huge amount of support with that. This is the difference. The term protagonist refers to the hero, the star of the film. And so not only does she want to get more women into the workforce, into executive positions, all of which is well and good, they also want to replace all those, all the male protagonists with women just because. There's a huge difference between those two things. And so what you have with Indiana Jones 5 is an agenda movie. It's an agenda movie. Designed, and it's fan fiction too. It's an agenda movie designed to strike down the patriarchy and replace it with our own little ideal. That's why it bothers me. Okay. We're almost there. Did that one. All right, here's another example. Star Wars editor Marcia Lucas slams Kathleen Kennedy, J.J. Abrams, and sequel trilogy. They don't get it. Marcia Lucas worked on the first 3 movies, the very first 3 Star Wars movies ever put out. And she says here, Abrams is writing these stories. When I saw that movie where they kill Han Solo, I was furious. A lot of people were furious when they killed Han Solo. They had Han Solo, Luke Skywalker, and Leia Organa, or whatever, and never put them in a scene together. That was a mistake. So Kathleen Kennedy admittedly she took the boys. Okay, Kennedy admitted she took the boys' brand in Star Wars and wanted to make it a girls' brand. Why can't it be both? Why does it have to be one or the other? Why can't it just be both? Variety calls it response to Indiana Jones and a Dial with Destiny at the actual Cons Theater when it was previewed as less than encouraging. I think this movie's going to suck. Oh, Blade. I had her update on Blade. But first, let's go here. The boycott against Bud Light is hammering sales. I want to talk about this for a quick moment. 6 weeks of consecutive decline. All right. You want to make a good... Let me turn my music off again. You want to make a good commercial? Watch this. Watch this one.
Kiss me. Touch me.
This is an actual commercial.
No power? EPC with 8 hours battery life. EPC. Power to charm.
If you're going to put women in a commercial, that's what they need to look like. As opposed to this. I will not belabor the point. Let's see, what was the last thing I was going to do here? Oh yeah, a Blade update. Blade has also been delayed because of the writer's strike. Here it's confirmed that this particular rendition of Blade will be a PG-13 affair, which means they shouldn't bother. Blade has always been, in the comics or whatever, Blade has always been more along the R-rated, it needs to be in the R-rated territory for the character to fully manifest himself. Blade is one of those characters, Blade is not Captain America. Captain America can go into a room full of Hydra agents and beat them all up, because Captain America's first goal is just to defeat Hydra and not kill all the Hydra agents. Captain America would kill if he had to, but it wasn't his first choice. Blade is not like that. Blade is a character that goes into a room full of vampires with one goal and one goal only, and that's to kill all the bloodsuckers, right? Every last one of them. And you can't do that on a PG-13. So I'm not sure why they're bothering to make this movie, but they are going to make it. It's being confirmed that it's still being, it's still in pre-production, and they're going to do it. I don't have high hopes for it. Okay. And we come to it at last.
Uh-oh.
What?
My time machine has been activated.
Time machine? I didn't know you had a time machine.
Yeah, I built it after I got bored with that European see-and-say.